right. Good afternoon, Mr. Golden. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Well, my name is Maria Griego. I'm the Executive Director for Student Support Services with Williamson County Schools. And I'll let Mr. Golden introduce himself.
I'm Jason Golden. I'm the Superintendent of Schools, and Miss Griego, who I tell y'all I'm going to call her Maria throughout this. We have historically had some meetings with the parents of our students with disabilities, and because we're remote, we decided we wanted to go ahead and have a similar conversation with you all in this setting.
Yeah. So we're going to start. Jason's going to tell us a little bit about his background, and we're going to go through a couple of beliefs and philosophies about special education in Williamson County Schools. And then we're going to transition to answering some questions that we received from our parent group. And so we're going to work our way through our agenda, and hopefully we hit some of the items that you may have had questions about. So, Mr. Golden, can you tell us about your background and experience with special education?
Well, sure. As I already mentioned, I'm the superintendent of schools, and I spent a number of years as deputy superintendent prior to that. And I will tell you first, when I think about special education, I think about education. It's a way to serve all our students, no matter where they are. And so I have some familiarity, of course, with the laws that govern students with disabilities, and some of them are federal. Most of them are federal, but there's also a little bit of state mixed in. But that's really not what drives us and what I think of first. What I think of first, for me personally, is the number of IEP meetings that I've been in that I really can't count, and hearing those personal stories about students and their families, and how students interact in a school setting and their needs. That's what I think of first. So when you ask me about my background, number one, it's a lot of IEP meetings, trying to find ways with the resources we have to serve students, and also trying to find ways to find additional resources from time to time when we speak to an issue that is brought to us by a family, and whether it's in the classroom setting or otherwise. So I spent many years talking with families about special education. Another thing that I've done over the years is spend a good bit of time on professional development with our faculty and staff in helping us to serve special education students. So in Williamson County Schools, even predating me, one of our student support services directors, and that's what we call, our department is student support services, and it includes special education, but it also includes some other support services. We move folks in and out from time to time. For a time, there were nurses in that department, and so we're talking about all those supports that students need. When these ideas really started taking hold decades ago, that students with disabilities must and need to and should have been served in a classroom setting. Our student support services director was involved at the federal level. And as I'm sitting here, I can see his face, Maria, and I know he moved to Arizona after this decades ago. His name popped in my head, but I'm not sure I should give it, because this is going to be published internationally. But he did a wonderful thing for us on the front end. And it was by participating in the federal discussions and talking about how to set up all the rules and all the regulations that were placed when the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act really got put together. We were on the front end of recognizing the intent of all that work that was done decades ago. Those of us who know history know that there was a time in our country where there was just a complete split between students with disabilities and other students, that public schools, traditional public schools, didn't have the capacity or capability of serving students, and they weren't expected to. And as that transition happened many years ago, we participated knowing the plan. And so when we hear phrases that are common in special education, like least restrictive environment, FAPE, or free and appropriate public education, I'm proud that we were on the front end of that to recognize what that meant for us emotionally. And I'm going to give you another parallel. Many folks are familiar with Title IX. Title IX was passed in the 70s, and the essence of that Title IX is that that women and girls should have the same opportunities as men and boys do in services. And there was a time back then with Title IX where athletic teams that were for men were actually cut because of the need to be compliant with Title IX. In other words, services were reduced because they were incapable of providing those same services to women. What we have done if you take that parallel to special education, is make sure that we haven't reduced our services for some compliance reason. When we meet, we talk about how to best serve our students, under all those parameters that we have. And I'm proud of that because I think we got a good start. And I think what we're doing now reflects that good start, that in everything that we do in our conversations, we're locked in on doing right by those students.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the next thing Jason and I are going to talk about are the beliefs and philosophies regarding special education for Williamson County Schools. And I'll start us off, and Jason, you can jump in. So I think first and foremost, Jason mentioned this earlier, we believe that all of our students have the opportunity to the maximum extent possible, right, to be educated with their non-disabled peers. And so the majority of our students spend time with their non-disabled peers in our public schools. And that decision is determined individually by each student's IEP team and made with the intent that we're going to find that environment in which a student can grow and learn, but also making sure we're taking into account social, academic, communication pieces that are related to peers. And yes, my friendly cat keeps jumping up behind me, and I apologize for the distraction.
Maria, I tell you, if some of our parents who are watching this participate remotely in their work, I'm sure they've experienced that before.
I hope so. She's a little finicky. So, all right. So the other thing that I think Williamson County really believes is that our students, to the maximum extent possible, should be educated in their zoned schools. Meaning that if I live in Brentwood, that I can go to my local elementary school, or if I live in Spring Hill, I can go to my local elementary or middle or high school. So we really try hard to, and we do offer the same services or very close to similar services. I guess the same is not a fair word, but equivalent or comparable services across all of our public schools. And so that is really important in terms of our philosophy and our belief that our students are educated in their schools with their peers to the maximum extent possible, in an environment in which they can learn. I also think that all of our students are general education students first. And I think that is a core belief that Williamson County Schools has, that all of our educators, whether they be licensed as a general educator or a special educator or some other type of provider, educational personnel, that we all value every student that we serve, and they're all general education students first. But some students with IEPs might need a little more, right? They might need a little bit more intense intervention or concentration in a certain area. Mr. Golden or Jason, anything you want to add there?
Well, you triggered a couple of thoughts in my mind when you
Sure.
talked about that. You talked about zone schools and the phraseology that those who are familiar with special education services nationwide know as least restrictive environment. And the rules actually specify what you just said. But what we have found in interacting with peers, really from place to place across the country, is that doesn't always happen because of services. But it is our number one goal to have the least restrictive environment, which, to Maria's point, is for many students in their zone school. It cuts down on bus rides, et cetera. Now, I will tell you, not every program we have has that capacity.
That's right.
Our early childhood programs, we don't have the capacity to do an early childhood program at all 28 of our elementary schools. And so we do have early childhood programs for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds at regional sites to make sure we can provide those services. But for K-12, including our Transition 1 students, it's at their zone school. Because that is the least restrictive environment for many students. And those of you who are parents of students with disabilities who have participated in individualized education plans know that that's often the discussion. Can we do what we need to do in your child's zone school? Now, with that being said, all the choices that any other family has regarding schools in Williamson County Schools are still those choices for anyone else. We don't restrict that. So every year, as part of our process here in Tennessee, we establish what are called open zone schools, that any individual can choose to go to one of our open zone schools. And the essence of those open zone schools is if there's room in the school. All students, regardless of disability, could choose those schools based on capacity up to the limits of whatever we set from year to year. But parents need to provide their own transportation. And so that opportunity is available to everyone. So we have of about 40,000 total students in our district, about 2,000 of our students are attending a school out of zone. And that's, of course, a mix of students with or without IEPs. That was one thought I had based on what you described. Another thought I had is one of the stories I like to tell when you talked about all our teachers. For years, I have spoken, even well before I was superintendent, to our new teacher orientation. And we have traditionally had a 2-day new teacher orientation, and up until this year, which is the COVID year, let's hope, we would do that at one of our high schools because we have large auditoriums and we could get our teachers together, spread them out for their professional development to prepare them as they came into the district. And I would speak to the group. Traditionally, I always did it at the very beginning of day 2. And one of the things I would do would be raise my hand and say, everyone who's a special education teacher, please raise your hand. And Maria, it's funny that a lot of those years, this was day 2 of our orientation, those special education teachers had often found each other. And often they were sitting together, close by in the auditorium. Maybe not everybody, but they kind of gravitated to each other, because of because of the professional development they were doing, and also because they had a lot to share with each other. So I do that. Raise your hand if you're a special education teacher. And then the next question I would ask would be, raise your hand if you are going to have a student with a disability or an IEP or a 504 plan in your classroom. Everybody else would raise their hand, right? Because of what you just talked about, that we're doing this at your zone school. So then at that point, I'd have just about everybody, if they were paying attention, just about everybody raising their hand. And then, of course, I would then say, everyone who raised their hand the second time, you're really a special education teacher. You might not have the special education teacher's license, but you are serving students with disabilities. And then I'd go on to talk about students' IEPs and say, everyone needs to know the individualized education plan for the students in their classroom. General education teachers, special education teachers. Everyone needs to know those goals, that it's important for the general education teachers to know the goals that the IEP team put together. So that's a point I try to make with our new teachers, to get them to emotionally grasp that we're all serving all our students, including our students with disabilities. And I will tell you also, in our IEPs, we make it a point for appropriate content area teachers to participate in those individualized education plans. You'll hear stories across the country of a teacher pop it in that might not know the student, or might even be teaching a class where the student's not there. The intent of the IEP team meeting isn't for that. It's for teachers who are going to be serving the students to participate. So we try very hard. Schedules are always a challenge. We try very hard for some content area teachers to be participating in the IEP because it's the right thing to do. So those are the two main thoughts that struck me when you were talking about your detail.
Great. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about are our overall goals as a school district for special education. And I think that as far as being the executive director for special education and student support services in Williamson County Schools, my overall goal is for our students to experience growth, to experience achievement, whether that be on grade level standards, if that's appropriate for that student, whether that be on IEP goals, whether that be, even a social goal or an adaptive goal in the IEP, or maybe it's a reading or math goal. Maybe it is a transition goal or a vocational goal. My overall goal for our students is to make progress, to move forward, and then ultimately be prepared for life after secondary education, right? What is that? College? Is that career preparation? Is that a job? Is that a post-secondary program that may be non-degree seeking? What type of program is that? And then how are we preparing our students to move on to that next step in their educational or vocational journey? So again, focusing on that growth and focusing on preparation for life after high school. And I think to do that, our goal is to ensure that we have the appropriate supports in place for our students. So that comes in my mind in all different forms, from our general educators to our special educators to our resources, our intervention materials, and making sure that we have all of the right supports and programs in place for a student with an IEP to make that progress. As far as my goal in order to serve our students, my goal is to provide our teachers and our staff with the most up-to-date professional development and resources. We've spent a lot of time over the last several years engaging in professional development. I mean, we do that all the time, but even more so with the virtual learning and remote learning and all of those different pieces that we've experienced, as Jason said, hopefully in this COVID year is the only COVID year, we hope. And so, but we've really upped our thinking, right? It's challenged us to think outside the box and think of new ways of doing things and how to integrate more technology. We used technology before, but how do we integrate it even more with our students? So my goal is for to be able to provide those opportunities for our staff, which ultimately transfers to additional learning and supports for our students. Jason, anything you want to add there as far as our goals?
Well, once again, you hit on your discussion triggered a couple thoughts for me. Number one, when you were listing all those areas, it just reminded me of the true nature of an IEP, an individualized education plan. That we do work hard to make it individualized, and so. For those of you who are parents who are listening, and even especially if you might have a child who's really just entering into the possibility of having an IEP, it's really about those teams discussing a particular need, not about what we do, but about the needs that drive what we do, so that we can meet those students' needs. It's individualized. So when you rattle off all those variables, it's because we do try. To meet the students' needs, no matter what those student needs are. And you also mentioned technology, and I think about how technology changes. Assistive technology is a phrase that we use a lot with special education services. And technology changes, technology improves. One of my best examples that I have in my mind recently is hearing impairments. There have been some pretty significant improvements in how individuals with hearing impairments can get assistive technology. Even things as simple as cell phones. I happen to have my cell phone right there. Now there are apps and available devices, Bluetooth, etc., that is very superior to what we might have had during those years where many of our parents were students, even 10, 15 years ago. There's been significant change. So we do have to stay current on technology. And I will tell you also, as parents, if there's something you're aware of out there, share that with us.
Please.
Because everyone has a culture of how you communicate. And I know many of you as parents share with others how to better serve your children based on what disabling conditions they might have that we can turn around and really make them more able to receive our instruction. So share with us. This is kind of a silly parallel, but I think of all those TV commercials about medicine. And those medicine manufacturers will run those commercials so that prospective patients are aware and can speak to their doctor about a particular med. And I know they're trying to sell those meds, and that's great. But for us, I know that you as parents might have something in your mind, and I want you to not be afraid to talk about it, because the team needs to talk about it and figure out how we can provide services to your student the best we can do.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, that brings us to our questions that were submitted for our recording today. And one of those, we received 2 questions for us to answer.
Marie, I got to interrupt. You said we received 2 questions. We've done these meetings physically at buildings before COVID, and we mentioned that earlier. The last one we had, it was one weekday evening. We had 2 parents come. And now you say we've got 2 questions. So it just makes me smile.
Yes. All right. So the first question is, what is the reason that they, meaning WCS, I believe, would consider a charter school just for students with autism?
Well, as we sit here today, and we're recording this in mid-February of 2021, we have received a request from an individual to create a charter school in Williamson County that is described as being dedicated to students with autism. There's a lot of detail to it, and I know from looking at the application, it aims to start with students at the youngest grades. And so the question is, why would we consider it? I'll give you the simple answer first, and it's because Tennessee law does allow for individuals to work to try to create charter schools, and the local school districts have an obligation to review those applications. And there's a lot of process for it to make a determination as to whether we think it's needed and feasible based upon the application. So that's the simple answer, we consider it because that's the process we go through in Tennessee, and we always want to make sure that we honor the intent of our legislature. So the whys are going to be largely driven by the individuals who submit the application. That's their whys. And so I will tell you, from our perspective, especially in the context of IEPs and students with disabilities, 504 plans, that whole realm of services we offer, like I said earlier, we are dedicated to making sure we give every student that free and appropriate public education. And we gave a little bit of detail related to how we do that here. And from a superintendent's perspective, whether or not that charter school is approved or succeeds or anything else, we are doing at our individual IEP meetings and on a daily basis what we need to do to make sure we serve every student. So as a leader, what happens with that charter school is not in any way going to change how I expect our folks to serve the students in our district.
Thank you, Jason. The second question submitted, what are the plans to offer remediation services over the summer? So I'm going to start with this one, and then Jason can jump in. So first and foremost, our teachers have been working with our students throughout this school year in the event that students needed to work on goals or objectives and kind of in that remediation manner. So they've been working on those throughout this school year. And then for each student's IEP, Kind of toward the end of the document, if you've been in those meetings or participated, you will know that there is a question that says, does a student need extended school year? And so our plan, just like all the other summers, is to offer extended school year, the same as we have in the past. And so individual IEP teams will make those determinations for each student to determine if that student meets the criteria for extended school year, and then ultimately it's a team decision for extended school year. So is the student going to regress over an extended break? There are some additional details there, but that's one of the main factors that IEP teams are looking at. And so those ESY services are available this summer and really are discussed and decided by each individual IEP team. So that will continue as planned. Your student's IEP team, your file holder, should be able to review that with you if you've already had the annual IEP meeting for the year, or maybe you all are meeting back this spring to make a determination about the need for extended school year. If you're unsure, I definitely suggest reaching out to your student's file holder or your principal at your school. I'm always welcome to reach out to me as well if needed, but definitely suggest reaching out to your file holder as a starting place if you have questions about extended school year. Mr. Golden, other things that you can think of?
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to that. So what we think of as ESY, and schools live by acronyms, and I know as parents grow with their children, they start using those acronyms too, because it's just common language. Extended school year, ESY. We're doing that, and so individual IEPs and IEP teams will put that together for students. I have a suspicion that the question came in part because what just recently happened at the Tennessee legislature. The governor introduced a package of legislation for a special session exclusively related to education. And they spent 3 or 4 days in a special session before the regular session started and passed a few laws related to education. And some of them were COVID related. And the one I'm about to talk about was deeply COVID related based on my review of it. They have created what they are describing as summer camps to address what they have described as learning loss related to COVID. Now, we haven't used the learning loss terminology ourselves. We talk about skills and skill deficits more often than that phraseology. But what has been talked about in the media is summer camps for students. And that legislation is 21 8.5 by 11 pages as I printed out. And so I won't be able to go through all the detail of it. But what it boils down to is 3 basic summer camp or summer school, in my mind, ideas. And it's structured, number one, with some services for students in the younger grades, mainly aimed at 3rd and 4th grade, and then students in the second one for students in middle grades, 6 through 8, or rising 6th graders through 8th graders. And then there's a third camp that's a stream camp: science, technology, reading, engineering, arts, and math. It started with STEM, and then of course over time, additional services are put together. But it's basically an extra hour behind these summer camps for some extra, what I think of as fun technology or reading, those kinds of things, to help students have an enjoyable time in this summer school. So the basics of those requirements at the state level are that every public school system in the state this coming summer, 2021, must start these summer camps. We actually have a good bit of summer programming already. Of course, Maria mentioned extended school year for students with disabilities to help maintain those skills that they've developed through the school year and not lose those during the summer. But we also have what we call Encore, which is a program for students to do a mix of instructional and fun activities over the course of the summer. There would be a lot of field trips. I mean, it's going to be tougher this year because we're still dealing with quarantines and some services not being available. But we have those programs. And we also have summer school for like 7th graders who who might be facing retention if they don't get some extra help, and for high school students who are facing a deficit in some of their credits for graduation. But this is much more comprehensive. The basic standards the state have set up is that for students on TCAP, T and Ready, which is the state standardized test, that generally speaking, the way this new requirement reads, anyone who finishes below or approaching under the standards of the testing actually would be eligible for these camps. And then after the first 2 years, there are some requirements placed on students that if they don't do this camp or maybe some other limited other options, they may have to be retained under Tennessee law into their grade level. So a third grader is the best example of that, the way this reads. But for the first 2 years, we are obligated to provide the camps. Families are not obligated to send their children. It's completely optional, completely voluntary for families this coming school year. When I speak to the testing about below or approaching, they have 4 categories currently in the way they do the state standardized testing: below, approaching, on track, and mastered. So basically anyone who is approaching grade level or below ultimately are the ones who are candidates for this program. Students with disabilities and students who don't have IEPs will all potentially be candidates for that. So what Maria is trying to point out is we are going to continue to give extended school year services to students whose IEP teams make it, but we will also make this camp available. They're 2 different things, but they may serve an overlap of students. We're in the process of putting that together as we sit here in February. There are a ton of logistical items that need to be addressed, including what curriculum, the number of hours that we're capable of doing this first year, staffing, who qualifies, do we and how do we provide bus service? Of course, food service will be part of this. These days are actually structured for at least one of the camps as a full day. And ultimately, when you tack on that extra hour, this could be a longer day than an ordinary school day over the course of the summer. In the camp period is either 4 weeks or 6 weeks based on which camp you choose. So I've given a lot of detail in that, and I tell you, I have scratched the surface of this detail. But for your purposes, Marie, and for the purposes of parents of students with disabilities, this has the potential to be one extra service that they could choose based on how their children qualify on the state TCAP, T and Ready test.
Absolutely, and we will stand ready if those students do intend to participate and they need accommodations or pieces to allow them to access those camps. My department will be ready to assist in that way, so that our students can participate alongside their peers. So, well, thank you, Jason, for taking the time today to meet with me and answer some questions and provide information for our community. We hope you all are doing well, staying
Well,
safe.
and Maria, I'm going to interrupt
Please.
you before you say safe and bye and say bye. I want to make sure that I take this opportunity to talk about just real briefly about individuals and their plans. We've talked a lot about IEPs, individual plans, and we've spoken in general. The reason why we've spoken in general is because there's no way to really get to the heart of an IEP unless a team is meeting and you have those direct conversations. You alluded to this earlier, but I want to make sure I'm clear. If you as parents have any questions, talk with your teacher, talk with your administrator, because it is about your child.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about what we're doing generally. It's about how we're serving your child individually. So sorry, Maria.
Absolutely true. No, I'm glad you added that in there. Definitely reach out to your student's file holder, their teacher, your administrators at those buildings. My office, you're certainly, if you can't find contacts and you want to reach out to my office, I can help direct you or answer questions. You can definitely go on our website under Student Support Services and find my contact information there if you need it. And thank you again, Jason, for hanging out with me for a little while this afternoon. And we hope you all are safe and warm on this icy, snowy day.
And we hope more than 2 people watch this.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thanks.